In our previous video, we discussed limits to infinity from the perspective of graphed functions. Well, let's think about this in terms of variables and written functions, which is how we're going to be dealing with these most of the time. So let's say instead of giving you a graph, I give you a function. So now I want the limit as x approaches infinity of x squared minus 1. Well, let's think logically. I'm asking you what happens to x squared minus 1 as x gets very, very large. Realize then that the minus 1 here is hardly relevant. That we're simply looking to see what's going to happen to the x squared. That makes sense because as x gets larger and larger, the negative 1 is going to play a smaller and smaller role in the output of the function. For instance, let's put in 10, 100, and 1000 for some examples. We see then that if I put in 10, I get 10 squared minus 1, which is 99. If I put in 100, I get 10,000 minus 1, which is 9,999. And if I put in 1,000, I'm going to get 999,999. So we see that the 1 is playing a very, very small proportionate role in the determination of this limit and the direction of the function. We also see that as I put in progressively larger x values, all I'm going to get is progressively larger output values. So for that reason, we can just conclude that this is infinity. And since we know that this is a parabola, in fact, this is the same parabola as we saw at the beginning of the last video, we see that it's going to infinity, and we can verify that algebraically now. Let's think about what happens when we have 1 over x. Now here, as x gets larger, what's going to happen to the 1 over x? So let's start with 10, 100, and 1000. So if we have 10, then my output is 1 over 10, which is 0.1. If I have 100, my output is 1 over 100, or 0.01. If I have 1000, my output is 1 over 1000, which is 0.001. So you see, we are going to get closer and closer to 0, but never quite hit it, because it's always going to be 1 divided by a progressively larger number. So then we can conclude that this is 0. Lastly, we have 1 minus x squared. Now this is similar to the third one, as the previous function, the 1 over x, is actually the second graph. The third graph here is 1 minus x squared. Well, let's think about this algebraically. We already know that the answer is negative infinity from before. But what's going to happen here? I'm going to be subtracting progressively larger numbers. So that means this is going to go to negative infinity as the 1 becomes less and less significant. And all we're going to do is subtract progressively larger numbers. So we're going to negative larger and larger numbers with no boundary and thus infinity. So we can see that the limit as x approaches infinity can be infinity, negative infinity, or a number. And it all depends on the situation. Now, a lot of the things that we're going to be dealing with here are going to be rational functions. And those rational functions, we're going to have a few rules for that we can derive from this logic. And we'll address that in the next video.